A young woman brought me a guitar her grandfather had cleaned every single week for 50 years and never once played. By the time I understood why, I had already learned something I didn't expect an instrument to teach me. That silence, if you carry it long enough, can hold a love story too.
Her name was Margot. She came to me on a Tuesday morning, holding the case the way people hold things they're not ready to let go of yet, even when they're the ones handing it over.
It was my grandfather's. He cleaned it every week. I never once heard him play it.
I didn't ask why. I've learned that the objects tell you why eventually, if you're patient enough to let them. I put on my gloves, I opened the case, and I understood before I even touched the wood that I wasn't restoring an instrument. I was restoring a silence that had lasted 50 years. If you've ever inherited something that carried more questions than answers, I imagine you already know the feeling I'm describing. If a story like this one means something to you, I'd love for you to be part of what we're building here. Subscribing helps more people find their way to these stories, and I read every comment you leave. The guitar was a nylon string classical, well made, the kind built to last generations if someone takes care of it. And someone clearly had. The wood was clean, the strings replaced more recently than I expected for an instrument no one played. Someone had kept it alive without ever waking it up.
Inside the case, tucked beneath the neckrest, I found a single photograph. Black and white, the edges gone soft with handling. A young man, maybe 22, dark hair, guitar across his knee, looking at the camera the way people look at someone they trust completely. Margot had told me his name was Julian. Behind the photograph, folded so many times the creases had nearly become tears, was a sheet of music, handwritten. The paper had yellowed to the color of weak tea. It stopped in the middle of a phrase, not at the end of a line, not at a natural pause, in the exact middle of what should have been the chorus. At the bottom, in careful pencil, almost worn away, "For my most beautiful melody." I sat with that phrase longer than I probably needed to, because whoever he wrote that for, the song never finished, and somewhere in that unfinished middle, an entire life had apparently gone quiet. I don't investigate people. That was never part of what I do here. I restore what's placed in front of me, and I let the truth surface on its own terms, if it wants to surface at all. But objects, when you handle them carefully enough, start pointing toward other objects. Margot came back a few days later with a small tin box she'd found in her grandfather's attic. The kind of box every family seems to have, filled with things too important to throw away and too painful to look at often. Inside it, a letter, never sent, the envelope still sealed. A woman's name written on the front in Julian's same careful hand, Josephine. There was a diary, too, only a handful of entries, all from the same spring, 50-some years ago. Julian wrote about a woman he'd been composing a song for, about a misunderstanding neither of them corrected in time, about waiting for her to come back first, out of a pride he later called, in his own handwriting, the stupidest thing I ever protected. He never sent the letter, he never finished the song, and, according to the diary, he never saw her again. But the tin box held one more thing, a printed recital program, folded so many times it had softened like cloth. A community hall, a spring evening, 50-some years ago. Julian's name listed as the final performer of the night. There was no second name printed beside a duet, which meant whatever he'd written that song for, he never got the chance to play it for her in front of anyone at all. I asked Margot if her grandfather still played guitar, in any form, in the years after. She said no, not once as far as anyone in the family remembered. But every single year, on the same week each spring, he bought a fresh set of strings. Nobody ever saw him change them. He simply kept the guitar strong and ready for 50 years, as if some part of him refused to let the instrument itself believe it was finished. And the old strings were never thrown away. Margot found them in the attic, every set, carefully coiled and kept in small boxes, 50 years of them, labeled by nothing, explained by nothing, kept anyway. That detail sat with me longer than I expected it to. A man who wouldn't play the song, but who also wouldn't let the guitar go silent in the way that matters, string by string, year by year,
quietly keeping a door open he never walked back through himself. Margot went looking for anyone who might remember that spring. An old neighbor of Julian's, a man in his 90s now, still lived 3 houses down from where Julian had grown up. He remembered the recital. He remembered, too, a woman who'd sat in the front row that night, the only person Julian ever seemed nervous in front of.
He never said her name to me, but he watched the door every night for a while after that, like he expected someone to walk through it.
Then the old man was quiet for a moment and added,
After a few months, he stopped watching the door, but he never chose a different chair.
Margot sat across from me while I read through everything she'd gathered, and she said the thing I think she'd been carrying since she first brought the case through my door.
I don't even know if she's still alive.
I didn't tell her whether I thought she was. I told her the only thing I actually know for certain in this work, that some things wait a very long time to be found, but they rarely wait for no reason at all. We found Josephine 3 weeks later through a church directory in the same town Julian had lived in his whole life. She was 81, still living 2 streets from where she'd grown up. Before Margot reached out to her, though, she found one more thing. Underneath everything else in that tin box, beneath the letter, beneath the diary, beneath the recital program, was a second envelope, smaller than the first, never addressed to anyone at all. Inside it was a single line, written in the same careful hand.
If you ever find her, don't tell her I waited. Just tell her I never managed to forget.
That was all. No signature, no date, nothing else. Margot told me she sat with that envelope for a long time before she could bring herself to fold it back up. Because it wasn't a letter meant to be delivered. It was a man, quietly, admitting the truth to no one but himself. And somehow, 50 years later, to the granddaughter he never got to explain any of it to. I wasn't in the room when Margot met her. That part isn't mine to narrate. It belongs to the 2 of them. But Margot told me about it afterward, sitting across from me at my work table, still holding the shape of that conversation in her face. Josephine had looked at the photograph for a long time before she said anything. Then she looked at the torn sheet of music, and she said, quietly, without bitterness, the way people speak when grief has had 50 years to soften into something gentler.
I never had the other half. I always wondered if he even finished it.
Margot told me she didn't know what to say back, because as far as either of them knew, in that moment, the song had ended exactly where the paper ended, in the middle, unfinished. The same way the 2 of them had ended all those years ago, in the middle of something neither one of them ever got to say. I remember thinking when Margot told me this, that some stories are allowed to end in the middle, but I didn't believe, not yet, that this one had to. The guitar needed real restoration before it could ever be played again. The bracing inside had loosened with age, and I couldn't in good conscience call it finished without opening the body properly. That's when I saw it. Wedged between the back panel and the internal bracing, folded so tightly it had nearly become part of the wood itself, was a second piece of paper. I sat very still for a moment before I reached for it, because I understood, before I even unfolded it, what I was about to find. Julian hadn't lost the rest of the song. He had hidden it, deliberately, sealed inside the one place he knew no one would think to look, inside the very instrument he could no longer bring himself to play. He didn't finish the song for himself. He finished it, and then he hid it away, the way some people bury an apology they don't yet have the courage to speak out loud, trusting maybe that someday someone else would find it and finish what he couldn't say to her face. I don't know if he ever imagined it would be his granddaughter. I don't know if he imagined anyone at all. But he wrote the ending anyway, and then he waited, the only way a man like that seemed to know how to wait. I wasn't in that room either when the song was finally played, but I like to imagine it, the way you imagine the ending of something you helped carry, even when you weren't there to see it land. Margot told me Josephine closed her eyes the moment the melody reached the place where the paper had once torn. And when the last note settled into the quiet of that small room, Josephine didn't cry. She smiled and said only,
That's exactly how he always heard it in his head.
Then, after a long pause, she added,
It found its way home.
Nobody said anything after that. There was nothing left that needed to be said. I restore instruments so that people can play them again. I restore them so that the things left unsaid finally have somewhere to go. Some apologies never arrive in words. Some of them arrive 50 years late, hidden inside the very thing a man couldn't put down, and finished, at last, by someone he never got to meet. If a story like this one stayed with you, I'd love for you to subscribe and walk through this door with me again. And if there's an unfinished story sitting quietly in your own family, I'd be honored to hear it. You can write to me privately at vellumoflife@gmail.com. Every story that comes through stays exactly as private as it needs to be.